welcome back to this video. This is a continuation of the C# beginner series. If you are new here, kindly subscribe and click on the notification bell so that you will be updated when a new video is out. Previously in the series, we had looked into the for loop statement. If you have not watched that, I want to encourage us to do so. In this video, we will be looking at what the while loop in C# is. Also, we'll be looking at the do while loop and we'll see the difference between the two. The while statement, unlike the for loop, is used when we do not know beforehand how many times we are going to iterate. So if you remember, when we talked about the for loop, we said that when we know how many times we are going to go through a particular loop or through a particular iteration, then we use the for loop. But when we don't have an idea of how long we will need to go through it, then we use the while loop. So the key there is, when I have an idea of how many times I'm going to go through it, I use the for loop. But if I am not concrete on the number of specific times it will take, then I use the while loop. So let's look at an example. So for the while loop, we have the syntax like this. So basically, while is saying that while whatever condition is inside here is true, it wants you to continue running whatever is within it here. So for example, I could say, let me just have a variable, I call it I0, and I could say while I is greater or is less than 10, I want to do something. So for example, let's say I want to console write line, and I want to console write line whatever is there, so console log I. So if I run this now, this will continuously keep running. It will never stop, and the reason why is that it has nothing to tell it where it should stop. So for example, I is 0 and I will always remain 0. So it means that this statement will always be true, and if this statement is always true, this will continually run. So the while loop is such that while this condition here is true, it keeps on doing the operation within the while loop. In this case, I'm just doing a console.write line there. Now, so what ideally I will do is to have something like this, so that my I changes, and so that at a point in time, this will no more be true, because when I becomes 11, I will no more be less than 10, and so this condition will no more be satisfied and wouldn't run this block of code. So if we run this again now, we will see that we have 0 to 9. Sorry, this is the way the console doesn't clear out the previous. So you see so 0 to 9 is basically what you see here. So by the time it gets to 10, 10 is not less than 10. It is equal to 10. So it doesn't satisfy this condition yet, and so it will not continue with the loop. It will step out of the loop. So this is basically the while loop. So for example, in this situation, if we set I to be 13 and we run this again, we don't expect to see anything, because there is nothing at the beginning. When it checks, 13 is already more than 10, so it doesn't go into this loop. And that is the difference between the while loop and the do while. So if I show us the do while is just basically you are doing this while, so I less than 10, for example. So if I put in the same thing, console log write line, now the same condition. So you are saying here I is equals to 13, right? And so it comes here and says 13 is greater than 10. So this statement is false, and so it doesn't run anything inside this while loop. And so when we come to this do while, it's going to go here, console log this. So but let's just run this and see what we have here. Or let me just comment this out so that it doesn't conflict and confuse us. So when we run this now, we see, okay, the output. Okay, so we see it shows us 13. This is the difference between the while loop and the do while. For the do while, irrespective of the condition, it will run at least once before it checks the condition. But for while loop, it will check the condition before it starts the iteration. So this is a major difference, and that means if I have something that will need to run at least once, then the optimal one to use is the do while, because you are sure it will run at least one time. But when you don't want it to run, if the condition is not satisfied, then you should always go with the while loop. So that is the difference between the while loop and the do while loop. So these three, the for loop, the while loop, and the do while, are used to perform loops within our program. So when you need to continue performing a particular task, you use the for loop, the while loop, or the do while loop, depending on the particular scenario you are trying to have. So I want to give us a small exercise. Our calculator that we've been working on, I want you to do it such that now, apart from the fact that you can add, subtract, divide, and multiply, I want the operation to be continuous. So for example, when we run the application, currently at where we are, it doesn't run anymore. It stops after the first time. We have to run our application again to try to maybe to do multiplication, or if you want to do division, you have to run it again. So basically what I want is to be able to continuously continue my operation until maybe I press in, let's use the letter Q. So if I give it an input Q, it's at that point I want it to quit. But if I don't give it an input Q, then I want it to continuously take in my inputs, continue performing my operations. I hope we do this, and I'll try to put in a solution in the next video, just a simple solution to that, and explain why I am going to use that. So for that, I want you to think through which of the loops should you use. Should you use the for loop? Should you use the while loop? Should you use the do while? And then based on your scenario and what you think, try and develop a solution for that. Thank you, and I will see you again in next video. Do not forget, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the comment section, and I'll be there to help clarify.